What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Acura Audio Garage. I'm your host, Orlando, and today we're going to be choosing some speakers for your Acura. Before we can get to choosing speakers, we have to just define some terminology, but before we jump into that, I'm just going to ask that you like and subscribe. Appreciate that a lot. Helps the channel a lot, so please do that. So back to what I was saying, some terminology. Something that you need to know before we dive into speakers is frequency. So what is frequency? What is frequency response? When you listen to music, every song has a set of frequencies that you're listening to. So here's what a 5,000 hertz frequency tone sounds like. I'm going to just throw it into the video. I'm going to throw in 1,000 hertz and then 100 hertz. So now that you've heard those different frequencies, they sound like different tones. They're continuous sounds that when put together obviously make up music. But the reason frequency response or frequency range is so important is because it determines the kind of drivers or speakers you're going to use in your audio build or your audio system. I'm going to demonstrate to you the most commonly used drivers or speakers in most audio systems. And that includes the tweeter, a mid-bass, a mid-range, a full-range speaker, and then lastly a subwoofer. Some systems also use horns, but most factory systems in your Acura aren't going to. So let me show you those components. The first driver we are going to be looking at is the tweeter. Tweeters come in different sizes and shapes, but they are responsible for covering the higher audible frequencies in music, usually from 3,000 hertz to 20,000 kilohertz. These frequencies are naturally created by percussive instruments. Here are some sounds that are in the 3,000 hertz to 20,000 hertz frequency range that would be created by these tweeters. The next driver we are going to be discussing is the mid-range. Mid-range speakers come in different sizes from 3 inches to 15 inches, and they are responsible for covering frequencies from 250 hertz to 5,000 hertz. Mid-range speakers are mostly used to reproduce voices and instruments. Our human hearing is most sensitive to sounds between 1,000 and 5,000 hertz, so choosing the right mid-range is extremely important. Alongside the mid-range driver is the mid-bass driver. The mid-range driver is often used interchangeably with a mid-bass driver, but they shouldn't. While some mid-ranges can play mid-bass, they are often not capable of playing their full power rating when being used as a mid-bass and mid-range. The mid-bass speaker is responsible for the frequency ranges between 100 and 250 hertz. These frequencies include drums and sound effects like this one. The mid-bass is usually not used in common audio systems. They are used in some Acuras with the ELS audio system, but are mostly integrated into factory subwoofers. Lastly, we have the subwoofer. Everyone knows what a subwoofer is, but just to be thorough, subwoofers are meant to play frequencies from 100 hertz and below. Subwoofers can be found in sizes from 3 inches all the way up to 18 inches. We've even seen 30-inch subwoofers in some cases. The reason the mid-bass is used in high-end audio systems and not just a subwoofer is because frequencies above 100 hertz make it easy for us to determine the location where the sound is being generated. This means that if you have the mid-bass playing behind you and all other frequencies coming from the doors next to you, your soundstage would be all messed up. In a high-end audio system, the soundstage should create a feeling like the music is right in the center of your dash. It should feel and sound like you're at a concert and the stage is right in front of you, where you can almost touch it. The last speaker or driver we need to talk about is the full range speaker. A full range speaker combines all of these speakers or drivers you saw before into one unit or component. So in this case, on this speaker, we have our tweeter, we have our mid-range and mid-bass driver. On this JVC, we have the same, our tweeter, mid-range and mid-bass driver. And then here again, we have a bigger full-range speaker, where we have our mid-range and mid-bass and our tweeter. These are the most commonly used speakers in car audio. They come in a coaxial form factor where the tweeter is mounted onto the unit, and a component form factor where the woofer, mid-range and mid-bass, is separate from the tweeter, but ultimately this forms a full range set for a speaker. These 3.5s are coaxial speakers, but they're not full range speakers because their frequency response is limited from 80 hertz to 20,000 hertz. These Infinity 3.5s have an even more limited range from 85 hertz to 20,000 kilohertz. And this mid-range only has a frequency response of 125 hertz to 9,500 hertz. So when choosing speakers for your Acura, you're gonna want to look at full range speakers unless you are building a complete audio system where you will mount tweeters, mid-range, mid-bass, and so. Talk about the speakers that are in your Acura, so your factory speakers. So if you have a newer Acura, you're gonna find that you have these speakers for door or rear deck speakers. And these speakers mount with 2 ears and 1 screw, and then they have their proprietary Honda connector. You can call these 6.5s or 5.25s, it's up to you, but these are your door speakers. If you have an older Honda or Acura, you might have speakers that look like this. They're gonna have 3 mounting locations, and they might have a coupler or some sort of spacer to help it mount in the door for the factory location. Along with your door or deck speakers, you will also have a tweeter. So all your tweeters are 1/2 inch, like this one, and they all have the same proprietary connector. Some use a bass blocking capacitor, other ones are crossed over at the amplifier for your Acura to protect the tweeter, but these you'll find in your dash, in your sail panel, or in your A-pillar. Then you have your mid-range. Your mid-range will work as your center channel in some Acuras, and also and the MDX and other Acuras use them in the A-pillars. Some Accords use them on the rear deck as mid-ranges as well. Then lastly, you have your subwoofer. Your subwoofer is 8 inches. It also has the proprietary Honda connector, and it's responsible for playing that low-end bass. So those are the speakers in your Acura that you are going to be able to replace. I want to say with moderate ease, depending on what exact one, but they all are the factory speakers available for your Acura. And when you go to replace them, you want to stick with speakers that have similar dimensions to these, so you're not cutting the door or fabricating something custom to fit the speakers. If you have a question regarding what exact speakers are in your Acura, leave a comment down below and we'll help you figure it out. When choosing speakers for your Acura, you want to look at the overall dimensions of your new speaker. So what I mean by that is, if we take a look at your newer Acura speaker, see it's about maybe 1 inch thick, but the magnet doesn't really stick fast out that far. So this surface right here mates with the door panel. So it'd be something like this. That much space is that magnet would stick back, which allows the window to go up and down without a problem. If we were to do the tests for what speaker could go in replace of this one, and we chose something like this with a huge magnet, one, this magnet might not fit through the same hole that this fits through, and two, when you go to mount it, if you were to cut the door or whatever you needed to do, if you mounted it flush, it would sit so much further in the door that it could possibly disturb the ability of the window going up and down. You might use a spacer to bring it further out, but if you were just to install this in place of that speaker, it might not, one, fit in the door, and two, the magnet might actually cause some interference for the window. Now, if we were to look at another speaker, maybe with a smaller magnet, and we tried to fit this in the door, these mounting holes might not provide a screw location to install the speaker. So when you go to install this speaker, these two tabs here slide into place. There might not be any metal, plastic, or other available material for you to screw this speaker into. That's when something like a speaker spacer or speaker adapter comes into play. We have these available, but other companies make them as well. But something like this will allow you to screw into the factory location or a modified factory location, but then place your speaker on top of it, giving you a nice even surface where the holes of the speaker line onto the brackets, and you're able to install your speaker without a problem. If you aren't going to be using a bracket, you want to have a relatively easy installation, you can kind of downsize your speaker. So this is a 6.5, this is a 5 1/4, and this can fit in that hole without an issue. You would just have to kind of grab some metal with screws around the sides, but it is something that can be done. But you want to look at overall speaker dimension, the mounting rim, the magnet depth, and your available screw points. 9 out of 10 times on your Acura, you're going to need some kind of spacer or adapter. Even the factory sometimes uses some. So this is the factory spacer slash adapter that is used to install the factory speaker into the door. If you need to cut the door or modify the door, speakers often come with templates. Right here you can kind of see the trace outline for that 6.5 for where you would need to cut. And here's the same outline for the tweeter. So if you needed to cut the door, you could use that to help you cut the perfect amount so that your speaker fits into the door perfectly. For your tweeters, when it comes to mounting these or replacing these, you're going to need a tweeter that's similar in size and can mount into the factory bracket or location. These mount with 3 little tabs, so you'll find that very hard to find. We have tweeter cups now available on our website, so they can take this tweeter and basically allow you to mount it in the factory location. And I'll show you those to you a little later on video, but just know that to install the new speakers in your Acura, 9 out of 10 times you're gonna need other accessories, including the spacer, a harness, or other components that you may not think you will need right away. If you are looking to replace the speakers, but you don't want to take your door apart to figure out what speaker you have, the size, the dimensions, a good tip to use for you is to go on eBay, look up your car's speakers. So 9 out of 10 times you can find your car speakers used and use those as a guide for how big your speaker is. That Acura speaker might have a different option or the same option as yours, so you want to verify that first, and then you want to look at multiple listings so that you can see any added or missing components. And something that could come up is like someone tries to sell you just these speakers, so you're like, oh, my speakers are this size, but little did you know that those speakers go in this spacer. So without this, you're thinking, okay, my speakers are just like this, but little did you know you have something else available where you can mount a new speaker to. So look at multiple listings, determine what your speakers look like, and then you can go and look for new ones. The next specification you want to pay attention to when selecting a pair of speakers is power handling. So your factory speakers have different power handlings, but they're all right around the same. So we'll start with your door speakers. Your door speakers usually have a power handling of 20 watts. And it's right there, it's stamped right on the speaker. Your subwoofer in your Acura is most likely going to have a power rating of 40 watts, like this one. And then your tweeter is going to have a power rating of 15 watts. Your mid-range is going to have the same power rating. This one isn't on here, but it's going to be right around 15 to 20 watts. So when you're choosing replacement speakers, you obviously want speakers that are at least 20 watts, if not higher for whatever speaker you're replacing. You want to be careful when looking at power handling. A lot of companies, their marketing departments are tasked with selling product. They come up with all different ways to sell product, and sometimes one of those ways is to deceive you. The way they deceive you is they put these huge numbers on the box, or sometimes even on the speaker themselves, for you to think, wow, that speaker must be really loud. It can handle a lot of power. A lot of times these numbers are blatant lies or things that can only be actually realized for a few seconds. So let's take a look at this Kenwood. This Kenwood says peak power is 260 watts, but RMS power is 30 watts. These 6x9 say 700 watt max, but their actual RMS power is only 120 watts. So when you're looking at power handling, you want to stick to continuous power, not max power. The way you want to think about continuous power is comparable to the way that you would think about running. So however fast you can maintain a pace is however fast or how much power your speaker can handle. So stay with me for a sec. Let's imagine you're running a mile on a track. The track, 4 laps on the track is 1 mile. So the first lap on the track, you trying really hard, you're running at a good pace. Second mile, you're like, oh, I can do this all day. By the third mile, you're finally tired, so you kind of slow down. The fourth mile, you're out of breath, so you're kind of walking, jogging. Finally, you're like, okay, there's only 100 meters left. I'm going to sprint these 100 meters. So you go as hard as you can, you finish strong, you sprint those 100 meters. When we look at the data, your average time per lap, let's say, was 2 minutes once we average a lap. So those 2 minutes is your continuous power handling. You can continuously run at a pace for 2 minutes for however long. Let's equate that to 2 watts of power. So if you were a speaker, you can continuously handle 2 watts of power. Now, that peak power, that sprint at the last 100 yards, you might have been running at a pace of 1 minute and 30 seconds per mile for that last 100 yards. So since you picked up the pace, that was your peak power. So your peak power might be 5 watts. You were running that much faster, and your speaker can do the same. So your speaker can continuously handle power of 20 watts. And it can, for a peak, for a short amount of time, seconds, milliseconds, can handle 300 watts, 500 watts, whatever they write on the box. Most of the time, you can't even generate that amount of power, and it will blow the speaker, but they use it to advertise. So don't look at peak power, look at continuous power. Continuous power is the amount of power a speaker can handle, continuously play music, not burn up or distort. So you want to pay attention to RMS power, not max power. All right, to answer a quick question you might have or might have just came up for you. What if you have speakers that are 40 watts RMS, but the radio or the amplifier puts out 45 watts RMS? As long as you stay between 10 to 15 watts of the rated power between the speaker and the radio or the speaker and the amplifier, you'll be fine. When the difference is larger, so if you put a 50 watt speaker on a 100 watt amplifier, then you're going to run into a problem. You could possibly fry your speakers depending on what frequencies they're playing. When you really run into an issue is when you have these high power seeking speakers with low power. So let's say you buy some huge loudspeaker, it can handle up to 150 watts RMS, and you're only using the factory radio, so you're giving it 14 watts, 15 watts max. That speaker isn't going to play to its full potential, so it might sound pretty bad. And for certain brands, they can ultimately cause damage. I've never seen it, but I've heard it from reps that you underpower the speaker, you can damage it. So just keep that in mind. You want to keep RMS power of the radio, the amplifier, and the speaker all within 15 to 20 watts, and you don't need to buy these huge 100 watt speakers if you're going to use them with the factory radio. So that's something to watch out for, and a common question that we get. If you have a specific question regarding power handling, feel free to leave it down in the comments and we'll try to answer it for you. So now we're going to move on to our next and most important specification, and that's going to be frequency range or frequency reproduction. So when we started the video, we defined frequency as a continuous note, and I played you some test tones so you can hear what they sound like. I showed you some graphs. Now we're going to use that knowledge here to help determine what speakers to buy. So all of these speakers on the table are meant to produce different frequencies. If you try to get these 3.5s to produce bass, they're gonna sound like garbage, they're gonna distort, and they're going to eventually fail. If you pick up a pair of these and you like to have a lot of bass in your door, then that was a great choice. But if you picked up these and you wanted a lot of bass in your door, then you might have some bad luck. You want to pick the speakers that have the frequency range for the frequencies that you want to hear or you are paying the most attention to. So this mid-range driver has a frequency response of 125 hertz to 9,500 hertz. So this loudspeaker mid-range is great for voice. It's great for instruments, but it is not meant to play bass, as it can only play from 125 hertz and above. And it's also not meant to play what a tweeter can. So any sound effects, especially in dubstep, it's not going to be great at reproducing. I've seen that these loudspeakers are very cheap online. They boast these large numbers, so they're very popular. A lot of people want to buy them. They do have some trouble installing them in the door because of their size, but eventually people either cut the door or just find a way to make it work. I don't recommend something like this if you aren't going to run a subwoofer and a separate tweeter, because this mid-range, again, can only reproduce those sounds. But if those are the frequencies that you're totally fine with, you don't care about bass, you don't listen to dubstep, you're not looking for some high frequency reproduction, then these might be a solid choice. Something like our Pioneers here have a component set that allow them to play very low. They play down to 34 hertz and up to 22,000 kilohertz. So these Pioneers will cover the full spectrum. The tweeter will cover the high notes. Your woofer will cover the mid-range and mid-bass. This is something that is more practical in your Acura because it can reproduce all the frequencies. The reason why you might choose a loudspeaker combination with separate tweeters and subwoofers is because the power handling of this speaker is greater than the power handling of these speakers. This comes into play when you're building a huge system, but when you're replacing factory speakers or adding a radio and replacing speakers, the Pioneers can handle the power that almost 90% of the amplifiers on the market can put out, and I would say 100% of the power that factory radios or aftermarket radios can put out. So power handling, while important, it's going to come down to frequency reproduction to which speakers you select. Let's look at another example. If you are looking to replace the mid-ranges in your Acura, so your 3.5 inch on the dash or in the pillars, you're looking to get more highs out of that speaker, then something like these Infinities or Kickers will do. But if you're looking to get more lows out of that speaker, you might have to find a 3-inch subwoofer, and that's where you're going to make a compromise. These speakers can play from 80 hertz to 20 kilohertz, but a subwoofer in that location might only be able to play from 120 hertz and below. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to frequency range. It is extremely important when selecting speakers. Along with frequency range, power handling, and overall dimension, each speaker has many electroacoustic properties that will ultimately determine how they reproduce certain sounds. But this video is meant for the average DIYer who just wants to upgrade his speakers to something better, not for those looking to create an audiophile level system. Now you may be asking yourself, why do I want my speakers to cover this huge frequency range? The reason is because you want them to sound good when playing all sorts of music. I'm sure you have diverse taste in music. You want to make sure that all music in your car is going to sound good. So you want speakers that can cover all those frequency ranges so that when different music is playing, it all sounds good. You also want to make sure that those frequency ranges can be played by that speaker, so when you turn the volume up, they don't distort. Because some speakers, while not rated to play a certain frequency, can generate that frequency at low volumes. But when you raise the volume, they easily distort and then cause damage to the speaker. So that is why frequency range is so important. you want to make sure that you're not damaging your speaker while you're listening to it. The last specification we're going to talk about in our video is impedance or speaker resistance. So when electricity is flowing through these speakers, it must combat resistance to move the voice coil up and down. That resistance varies from speaker to speaker, and it also varies in when it is generating sound. So as the frequency of the speaker changes, so does this resistance. And that plays a huge part in subwoofer selection. It does influence speaker selection, but it's really big for subwoofers. The most common impedances or resistance you will see in speakers are 2 ohm, 2.7 ohm, 3 ohm, 4 ohm, and 8 ohm. These infinities are 2.7 ohm. This JVC speaker is 4 ohms. This Hyphonic speaker is 4 ohms. This speaker here is 8 ohms. So speaker impedance varies from speaker to speaker. You want to make sure that you're replacing the speakers in your car with similar impedance speakers. So certain Acuras have 2 ohm speakers in the front and 4 ohm speakers in the back, 2 ohm speakers all around. Other Acuras have 4 ohm speakers all around. Some have weird combinations of 4, 2 ohm, and even 6 ohm speakers. So you want to verify the impedance of your speaker before purchasing a replacement. And again, if you are looking for your speaker, your exact speaker, eBay is a great place to look so that you can see the old speaker, maybe get some labels off of it, and do some research. The reason why speaker impedance is so important is because as the impedance of a speaker rises, an amplifier or source unit has to put more effort or work into moving that voice coil. So that results in lower volume when using the same amount of power in speakers that have a higher resistance. So a very common thing we see is for someone to upgrade the speakers in their Acura, they had 2 ohm speakers and they went to 4 ohm speakers all around. That change in impedance resulted in a loss of overall volume from every speaker. So while a change from 4 to 2 will not be half as loud, it was still significant enough where people have reached out to us to say, hey, what did I do wrong? I upgraded all my speakers and they sound better, but they don't get as loud as they used to. And that's exactly what happened. You increase the impedance of each speaker, thus the same amount of power stayed from the factory amplifier, so they're gonna result in less volume. So now you may be thinking, hey, so I should always just grab the lowest impedance speaker I can. And yes and no. So usually the lowest you can go on any factory system is right around this 3 ohm or 2.7 ohm. And you can replace 2 ohm speakers with 2.7 ohm speakers and not really lose any output. So that's why JBL and Infinity are our go-to brands, because whenever you're upgrading speakers, you want better sound, but you want more volume. And a lot of people don't tend to understand that the reason why your speaker gets as loud or as low as it does is because of the source unit. So the radio is what's causing the speaker to be that loud or not that loud. While the speaker technology between old speakers and new speakers is different and helps generate more volume or better sound, power has a lot to do with it. So by going from 4 ohm speakers to those 2.7 ohm speakers, you usually get a very satisfied customer who has better sound and now is louder. But sometimes those Infinities or JBLs don't fit into the equation, so you have to use other speakers. And 4 ohm speakers are the most commonly used. So what you need to watch out for when selecting impedance is that they are the lowest possible that are going to work with your system. So what can happen is you'll put a 2 ohm speaker where a 4 ohm speaker was supposed to go, and now the amplifier or the radio can't handle that low of an impedance, so it's sending more power through that line, generating more heat, and eventually you burn that channel the amplifier or the entire radio out. So you want to verify that whatever impedance speakers you select will work with the system that is powering them. So if you're using a radio to power all your speakers, you're going to want to stick with 2.7 to 4 ohm speakers. You want to be in that range. If you're using an amplifier to power your speakers, some can support a 2 ohm load. So if you go with a true 2 ohm speaker, you can get a lot more volume out of it with the same amount of power. When it comes to subwoofers, subwoofer amps, you can get really low. So 1 ohm is kind of like the industry standard of where you want to be to get the most power. But you can go down to half an ohm, 1/3 of an ohm, and really get a ton of power out of some amps. But that's when you have to deal with heat, things going into protection. You need to know what you're doing there. So my recommendation to you is go with the JBLs or the Infinities if you're looking for a subtle upgrade. If you're looking for something very specific, stick with 4 ohm speakers. And if you really know what you're doing, then you don't need to follow my advice. You can just do what you want. There are 2 other specifications that are pretty important that we didn't cover in this video, and that's going to be speaker composition and impedance rise. Speaker composition is just the materials and the form and the manufacturing process behind the speaker. That plays a lot into how it's going to sound, but the most common selling speakers are manufactured very similar, so they're going to sound very similar. As you get into higher end audio, speaker composition plays a huge part. Now, impedance rise, like I mentioned earlier, plays a huge part in subwoofers. It does also vary for speakers, but again, in your entry-level speakers, they're all going to have a similar impedance rise curve, so it's not really that important for us to cover in the video. If you're looking for either of those, you want us to cover those in depth, then just leave a comment, give the video a like, and we'll take that into consideration for making that video. Now that you have all the information, you're ready to go out and find some speakers. I recommend by starting on our website, AcuraAudioGarage.com. We have speaker sets set for mostly all Acuras at this point, so you can find the speakers you want to upgrade. You can upgrade the entire speaker set, or just your fronts, just your rears, just your tweeters, etc. All our speaker sets, all our speakers come with the proper adapter, harness, speaker harness, tweeter harness, all the accessories you need to make your installation plug and play. You don't have to mess around with cutting the door, cutting wires, figuring out what's positive, figuring out what's negative, figuring out how to mount your tweeter. All that stuff's covered for you. It makes installation real easy, real simple. I'm going to show you some of those accessories now, but if you're not sticking around, you already got the information you need, then I just want to say thanks for watching and make sure you like the video. For those sticking around, I'm just going to get my table ready and I'll show you all this stuff. So if you're looking to install new speakers in your Acura, you're going to need an adapter bracket. You're also going to need the speaker harness because they share a proprietary connector. This is for the newer Acuras. This is for the older Acuras. And these are kind of in the middle. They're used in between. And if you want to replace the subwoofer, you're going to need a special bracket because the subwoofer is a special size. So you can use something like this. When it comes to replacing your tweeter, here's the tweeter cup I was telling you about. So this tweeter is fully seated in there. And then here's an empty one. The way they mount is your factory tweeter housing has 3 tab or triangle-like mechanisms. What you do is you just snap this into that triangle. It's not a perfect triangle, so it does have a proper orientation, but when clipped into place, it will no longer move and it'll be fully seated in that factory housing. We also have the speaker harnesses. So here's the tweeter harness to replace your tweeter. This will eliminate any cutting or guesswork in what's positive, what's negative. Your pillar speakers in your newer Acuras use this connector for the speaker instead of, they use this. The newer Acuras use this connector for your pillar speakers or your mid-ranges. The old ones still use the proprietary standard Honda connector. We have the male and female ends of both. So if you wanted to make some sort of T-harness, you could always do that. And then we also have the amp bypasses for the newer Acuras and the older Acuras. So if you're looking to bypass your factory amp, you can do so. A quick note on the bypass. If you have navigation on a newer Acura, bypassing your amp is almost impossible. You're going to have to use the source. You're going to have to use the amplifier signal to a DSP and then your DSP to your amplifiers. If you try to eliminate the factory amplifier, you'll realize that you can't get full volume control from the factory anymore. So you'll need to run an external knob for volume, which is most likely going to come from a DSP. So just use a DSP in the beginning and save yourself the trouble. But here are the accessories you can find all on our website, and the speaker packages, all the speakers you see here are available on our website as well. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up the video. If you made it this far, I want to say thank you. I'm going to offer the first 100 people to view this video a discount on the store. So you can use discount code YouTube and you'll save 10% on whatever you want to buy. Also, to thank you for watching, sticking all the way through, I'm going to be giving away a set of these speakers. So they're most likely going to be JBL, Infinity, or Pioneer speakers. So if you're interested in that giveaway, make sure you're following us on Instagram. That giveaway is going to go down on Instagram. We're planning to give away one item every first of the month. So make sure you follow Acura Audio Garage and continue to follow so you can be part of those giveaways without having to do anything. Just as long as you're a follower, you're put into the computer software. The computer software will pick a winner, and then we'll ship you out whatever you want. You don't have to pay for shipping or anything like that. We'll just need to get your information, and we'll send you the stuff. So as always, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video.